Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to make sure we honor your time and start on time, end on time, that kind of good stuff. And this is you're going to learn a lot about me, so I don't really need an introduction from Joy. But my name is Gary Hensley. I'm currently the CEO of Livingtree. I started mentoring here at UT this semester. So learning a lot, met a lot of great students, and excited to be here at the Entrepreneurship Club. So this is, everywhere I go, this is my tribe, man. Everywhere I go, I try to connect with that entrepreneurship center or an entrepreneurship college or university so that I can kind of see what's going on. But I'm going to share a little bit of my journey today. This is your time, so I hope that you ask questions. I used to be an 8th grade teacher, so you cannot interrupt me more than 8th graders. So make sure that make sure you ask questions. I want this to be valuable to you. This is why you're here. You said yes to the event. I want to make sure you get something out of it. So I'm going to start with this quote. It says, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future." And if you haven't ever watched have any of you watched the commencement speech by Steve Jobs? Okay. If you haven't, and you want to be an entrepreneur, it's definitely one of those things you want to watch. I've probably watched it 100 times. And that particular sentence, I start with that for a couple reasons. One, I'm going to share my journey with you, and it's going to sound like everything made sense, and I knew what I was doing, and it kind of all worked out. But I've taken 20 years to look back on that journey and be able to connect my own dots in my life to say, wow, I didn't know how this was going to turn out, but looking backwards, I can see how some of the things I did was laying that foundation, even though I couldn't see it at the time. And I know a lot of you are just kind of starting your journey, right? And you've got your own dots that you're kind of starting to connect. So I want you to think about that as we're kind of going through this. Like, what dots have you already started to connect? What questions do you have about what dots you might need to connect into the future? The other thing is entrepreneurs are dot connectors by their nature. Right, you see problems, you see the world differently, I think, than a lot of people do. And you draw connections between things and the people in the room. And so we are dot connectors by just our very nature. So if you call yourself an entrepreneur, you're a dot connector, right? And so I'm going to help connect some of those dots along the way in my journey, and hopefully that helps you see some things in your own journey. So my journey, I'm going to start with this. This is one of the highlights of one of the things that I got to do, which was to pitch. And in the corner there is Kevin. Why can't I remember his name? CEO of Under Armour. Kevin Plain? It's Kevin. Richard Branson, who is Virgin Atlantic CEO. Donna Harris, who's the founder of 1776 and a moderator. And this was one of those awesome moments in my career where I got to be in front of a really cool group of people. And it was one of those dots for me because looking back, before I got to pitch all of these people, I started here. And so we're going to go to the very, very, very beginning of my journey. So I was just graduating from college. I went to school to be a teacher, I thought, and at the end of that experience, I had to do some student teaching, and I had an amazing student teaching experience in terms of working with kids. But the system of education was really, really tough, right? And I felt at that time there was no way I was going to be able to survive in that environment. I was in North Carolina. It was just crazy. They just wanted me to do things the way things had always been done before. They wanted me, in fact, my student teacher wanted me to use the same printouts that she had used for the last 20 years to teach biology. And I was like, that's insane. But that was the environment, and that's just the way it was. And so after kind of going through that experience, I was like, I don't think I can survive here. I don't think teaching is for me. So I went to Northern Virginia, where my parents were at the time, and I was trying to get a job. This was right after the dot-com bubble had busted. So I went to school, and everything was about the internet and dot-com, and it was soaring high. When I graduated, it had burst, and there were no jobs available. So here I am, a teacher by degree, a biology teacher, but I don't want to teach, and I got to find a job. So I'm looking for my first job. And I found a company that was doing door-to-door sales, and I said, why not? So just say yes, right? I didn't have any other prospects at the time, and I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. I don't know where it's going to lead me, but I'm going to take this job, and I did. I'm going to frame things for every job because I think this is true whether you're working for somebody or you're starting your own product. How many of you have something you're working on, like a product or a company that you're working on? Okay, awesome. Well, I guess so, right? Entrepreneurship. That makes sense. I'm going to frame everything that I talk about in this kind of big, scary problem and solution. And I hope that you start to see things that way too, because it is really, really important as you're going out there and you're pitching people about your company, that you have your big, scary problem kind of down, and then you've got your solution. That's the second part of your pitch, and then you've got all the other stuff that comes along. But I can tell you, if you nail the big, scary problem and the solution, the rest of the stuff is so much easier. So we're gonna start there. So whether you're starting your own company or you're working for somebody else, there is a big scary problem that they're solving, right? So if you're working for somebody else, you're solving their big scary problem. Whoever the founder of that company started something and was like, hey, this is a big scary problem I want to go solve, and you're working for that company, so you're helping them solve that big scary problem. If you're doing it for yourself, awesome. But you got to know what that big scary problem was. So when I went into door-to-door sales, I wanted to understand what the big scary problem was. And the big scary problem at that time was big brands like AT&T and AOL and energy companies wanted access to the small and medium-sized business owner. This is your restaurant shops, your Kinko's, your FedEx, before Kinko's was bought out. They wanted access because that's such a huge market. But those owners were always running the business, right? So they didn't have time, and email wasn't as popular as it is now. So the only way to really reach that particular person, and it's a huge market, was to go door to door. And so there was a company that was spun up, and they essentially did that. And their model was to use sales reps that worked on straight commission. I think, Will, you guys are using a group like this in your, yeah. So this problem still exists, right? You need feet on the street programs. So they spun these up, and they worked for big companies that wanted to reach that small to medium-sized business. And I signed up, and I represented AT&T. So I'd walk in the door. I'd walk in to a shopping center. Imagine like a big shopping center. You got, a Publix, you got a couple, Chinese restaurant, you got, your gamut of all of the things there. And I would go one by one to each one of those. And I would try to say, hey, my name is Gary, I'm from AT&T. Hey, my name is Gary, I'm from, AOL. Hey, my name is Gary, I'm from Washington Gas Energy Services. We even did residential some weekends to do that. And it was tough. It was really, really hard, and I did that for about 3 years. And I learned some things doing sales that way that, again, in retrospect, I don't think I could have learned any other way. So the solution to that problem was an outsourced team, outsourced feet on the street marketing company with a sales force that worked on straight commission. So I'm going to kind of connect some of these dots in that experience for me. As I was going through that, I thought about this. At the time, I was really worried about my first job. And if any of you about to graduate or already are you all already graduated? Okay, so you've already thought about this. But at the time, I was really worried about my first job. I didn't know, I wasn't a teacher, and I went into sales, and I didn't know what that was going to lead to. So my advice to you in retrospect is, if you haven't got any sales experience, if you haven't done sales, I would highly recommend that you get some level of sales experience. I was at USF a couple weeks ago, and someone asked me, well, what do I do if I can't do door-to-door? That's not really a thing anymore. And I would say, well, it is still a thing. People still go door-to-door. However, there's other jobs you can do that don't require you to go door-to-door. You can be a BDR, which is a business development representative. You do phone sales. You have 3 minutes to kind of convince somebody that they need your service. I think you may have done this in the past. You need to get some sales experience for a number of reasons. One, if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to be selling, right? You're either going to be selling your product, you're going to be selling your employees to work for you, probably for less than that they could get at another job. You're going to be selling your customers. So you are going to be selling all the time. And when I did this for 3 years, I made 80 to 100 pitches a day. So I don't know what that is in 3 years, but it's a lot of pitching. And it laid a really interesting foundation for me because after doing that, I just saw the world differently than I did before I started. You never know who's going to be at the next door. That's the other thing I learned. As we were going through the shopping center, I literally had to go to every single door because I didn't know who was going to be there. It was always that door that I didn't want to go in that ended up being the biggest deal at the end of the day. So I just learned to go and see opportunity and never, ever skip a door because that could have been the door that said yes to me and basically made my day. Remember, I was working on straight commission, right? So I couldn't afford to lose that opportunity. And keep going. You'll see later in kind of my journey, that idea of keeping going. As an entrepreneur, you are going to have to just keep going. When you don't want to, when you're tired, when, I literally walked the soles off my shoes one day because we did so much walking, right? But I had to keep going. So I learned a lot through that experience. That took me from DC or the Virginia area to Southern California. I had built up a couple teams. I was actually pretty good at sales, even though I didn't love it, but I could build teams, and we went out to California to start a campaign for Sparklets water. If you guys are particular about your water, Sparklets is owned by Dannon, and I thought, man, this should be easy. Selling water in the desert of California should be like one of the easiest things I've ever done. And I turned out to be wrong about that. People are very particular about their water, and they would switch for like a penny difference between one jug and the next. So it was very, very difficult market. But that got me out to California, and I was ready to kind of pack it in on sales. That campaign wasn't going well. My team wasn't doing well, and I was at another kind of crossroads in my life. Okay, did sales for 3 years. I'm pretty burned out. I'm in a beautiful area in Newport Beach, California. What am I going to do next? And after kind of thinking about it, I said, hey, I'm going to go back to what I started, which was my vision was to be a teacher. So I did that. I started in the classroom, and I applied to a school nearby in Newport Beach. Bless you. And I was going to teach biology, but they didn't have a biology program, so they said, hey, can you teach chemistry and physics? I said, well, it's been a while, but yeah, I think I could do that for 8th graders. And the big scary problem for me at that time was 8th graders. It was a challenge, to get in there and convince them that science was super important. And I needed them to love science. So I went into the classroom with this idea that I had to sell them that this was important. So I was like, hey, listen, guys, you can make money at science. I was like, what do 8th graders care about? They care about money. They care about being successful. They, all of those things. I was thinking back to I have my own 9th grader, but they just care about that stuff, right? And so I said, look, everything that you're sitting on, from the chair you're on to the room you're in, there was a scientist that said, hey, these chairs suck. I think I could do a better job, and let me do that. Let me build that. Let me applied science. Let me get a different material. To surfboards. We were in Newport Beach. The science of surfing. I tried to make science relevant any way possible, right? And I learned that from doing sales because I had 3 minutes to convince people to trust me and actually sign a contract, right? That's a short amount of time. And I said, oh, wow, let me take that skill and apply that to teaching. And the kids loved it. We did amazing projects. We did the science of surfing. There's physics in surfing, not only the waves, but the tides and how the moon affects the tides. And so it was an amazing experience. And I absolutely love teaching. And part of the reason I'm here in front of you today is because I still enjoy that aspect of life. I love to be in front of people. I love to talk to people. And I love to share kind of what I've learned in my life. So I actually want to go back to something real quick. I thought this was a really cool quote. It says, "They asked me why I teach, and I reply, where could I find more splendid company?" This comes from a poem that John Wooden quoted, and this is talking about a teacher. And the more splendid company, it goes on in the poem to talk about, in the room, she sees future doctors, future entrepreneurs, future lawyers, future dentists, future restaurant owners. And that was her vision as she taught. And I think teaching is such a calling. So I just wanted to put that out there for you. It is a big, scary problem to go after 8th graders, but what an amazing thing to sit in front of people. Who knows? Maybe somebody in this room runs the next Google. And I got to be here in front of them today and didn't even know it. So very cool. So as I was going through that, I transitioned. I did 2 years as a teacher. My principal encouraged me to go into administration. So I did. So I was taking a master's class at night while I was teaching during the day. That was very challenging, but I was young, a lot of energy, so not a problem. And I started down the career of administration. And I was like, this is great. I can see a path. I had a lot of energy, so I was willing to move fast. And they said, hey, if you finish your master's program, you become an assistant principal. And I said, that sounds good to me. Not only that, it paid twice as much as being a teacher, so I was like, that also sounds great. So I moved out of the classroom into administration. And that was a huge, huge moment for me personally, because I didn't really understand what administration was all about, but it took me away from kind of the thing I really loved, which was teaching kids. So I had my 180 kids that I was responsible, and I went for being in charge of 1,000 kids at my school. In California, they got really, really big schools. And about 6 months into that, being an AP, I was really kind of bummed out on how things were working as an assistant principal. Now, I don't know if any of you would admit to going to the assistant principal's office, but if you did ever go to the assistant principal's office, you always know that it's usually not for great reasons, right? And so I was kind of watching the business of an AP. And I realized that a lot of times I was seeing the same kids over and over and over again for all kinds of different reasons. I'd call them in, they had 2 or more Fs, so we'd run this list, and they'd come in, and I'd see a group of kids. And then we'd call in another group of kids who had attendance issues, and we'd call those group of kids in, and ironically, not so ironic, but it was the same group of kids. And then we'd do another list on the data, and we'd call in kids that had 2 or more behavior issues. And it was the same group of kids, but I would call them into my office 3 different times. And I was remembering some of the stats stuff that I was doing, and I was dating someone at the time that she was a broker, and they were using indexes, and I remember she was watching the market, and I was like, man, this idea came to me. It's like, why do I have to sit here in my desk and wait for something to happen? Why can't I have a system that helps me find the kid that needs my help, as opposed to just waiting for something to happen and they send them to me? And by the time they got to me, the problem was huge, right? They had failed things. Their attendance was in the tank. Their parents were like, they didn't know what to do. I was like, what if I could find them early as opposed to late, which is where I was usually finding them in my role. And so I combined this idea that I learned in my stats class with kind of a situational moment that I was in, kind of watching stock ticker, and then it just like, bam, it hit me. I was like, what if I could build a system that was like a stock ticker for kids? In an instance, I could look at a stock ticker and say up or down, green or red. And me as an assistant principal, I could go out there and find the kids that need my help fast. And so I did that. So there was a number of issues. I started a company. I decided at that point I was literally at a fork in my career. I was either going to be a principal. I'd actually just applied for my principal job, so I'd been an assistant principal for a year. I was already going to be a principal. I was going to start my PhD program, because to be a superintendent you had to have a PhD. So I was going to go to USC, and I had it all lined up, and this problem just kept like itching at me. And so I was like, I could take this safe road, or I could take this moment right now and go try to solve this big scary problem, because I knew that it wasn't just if I could solve it, it wasn't something that just affected me. It could affect hundreds of kids, right? There's a number of reasons why the dropout problem is huge. There's huge ratios, 1,000 to 1. So even if I saw one kid every day, I would still not get through every kid in a school year. There's only 180 days, right? So I needed data. So what we built was an algorithm. The solution was an algorithm that could predict which students were most at risk of dropping out so that APs and school counselors could intervene earlier. And what we called it was an early warning system. It was an early warning system for counselors and APs. And as you're building your pitch, you'll notice big, scary problem, solution. And I'll add one more thing to that, a bold statement, something that makes you different than everybody else. So the most at risk, or the early warning part of this, was something at that time that was pretty novel. Like that you could identify a kid 6 months before they would traditionally get identified or be at risk of dropping out of school. That was a big claim to make, right? And it got us a ton of attention because, well, it was a big claim. You have to say something bold. So as you're thinking about your pitches, that big, scary problem is important. But that solution plus if you've got a bold statement that you can make about your product, make it, because it will kind of make people listen to your story. So we built an early warning system, dashboard with easy to understand, actions to take, and then we did one more bold thing. Yes? Yes. Well, we knew it had to be true, but we hadn't quite proven it yet. So we needed to prove that out. And so what I did was, because I knew that was going to be a problem for us, and I said, okay, where can I go where people will say, just won't ask me questions? So I found a lady at Harvard University, and I said, I say from Harvard University, they're going to stop asking me this question, how do you know? And I went to her, I actually flew up with my co-founder, and I said, hey, can you take a look at the math that we did? And can you tell me if the way that we've done the math is more predictive than what is traditionally done? So we spent a day with her, and she said, yeah, absolutely, your math is spot on, and this would traditionally identify them 6 months earlier. And then I asked her the next thing, can I put your name that you said that? And also use Harvard University that you worked there. And she said, absolutely. And that was really a game changer for us, is that we were able to do that. Yes? My co-founder was a guy named Todd. He was actually here. I was in California. He was in Florida. He was a technical co-founder, so I didn't have, I wasn't a coder, so I found somebody that could help me code. I actually started that with I was pitching the idea to somebody at my own school district and said, hey, if I could build this, would you buy it? And she said, not only would I buy it, but I'll give you $30,000 right now to build it before you even have done it. And so I took that money and basically gave it to Todd to start building a prototype of the system. And I have to tell you, I made a ton of mistakes. So if you have questions about what not to do, you can definitely ask me, because I probably have made all of those mistakes. So the name of the company was Integrade. Yes? Did Todd? She did not. She was just an early adopter, and I ended up naming the algorithm after her as kind of in honor of her. It was called the Garland score. Her last name was Garland, Jane Garland. So I named the score after her kind of as a tribute to being an early customer. Good question. So kind of some details. Technical co-founder, company structure, we were a Florida LLC. Our initial funding was a friends and family round. We did $150,000 friends and family. I had 2 advisory board members. Those advisory board members were critical. One of them wrote the book on school counseling in California. In fact, any curriculum that's done nationally, she heard what we were doing and how it could impact school counseling, and she was on board immediately. And then I had another guy who was more of a finance person on my advisory board. Both were super critical to our kind of success. And then we went from start to finish in 3 years. We were acquired by Pearson at the end of that. And that story in itself is another story of just kind of me saying yes to stuff. So usually if I get invited, I will go. That's just my general rule. That has not let me down in 45 years of life. Sometimes it's like awesome. Sometimes it's just, okay. But either way, I go. And the story of the acquisition is I was going to a pitch competition. And it was in New York. And it was probably, something that we could have used that money differently. I'll just put it that way. But I had this feeling we needed to be there. And my co-founder and I weren't in agreement on that. So I eventually said, I'm going regardless. I'm going to this pitch competition in New York. So I flew up there. He eventually came around. And we ended up winning the pitch competition in 2 categories, most likely to succeed and most likely to turn a profit. So I met a lot of people in that pitch. If you guys have done a pitch competition, I encourage you to do it because it's like a knife sharpening tool. I mean, it helps you just get better at your practice. But I was in the room, I was shaking a lot of hands, and my co-founder at the time, he said, hey, that guy's from Pearson, you should go talk to him. His name was George Kane. And I was like, Pearson's so big, they're literally the largest education company in the world. Like, what are they gonna want with us? Like, we're small potatoes. But I did it. I went up to the guy, I said, hey, my name's Gary Hensley. We're the people that just won. He said, I love what you're doing. 6 months later, we had a term sheet, and we were acquired by the largest education company in the world. And if you kind of go back and kind of look at that experience, for me, some of the dots that I hope that you connect in your own kind of journey is moments of inspiration can happen at any time. So I make it a habit to write down any idea. I've got some ideas that are just a sentence on my notebook. Some ideas are like full-blown pitches, depending on how many times I've come back to the idea. And what I've noticed is certain ideas I come back to more often, right? And so those are the ideas that I start to work on. Yes? No, it wasn't. It was in New York. It was SIAA. We've been to South by a ton. That's a second company I'll tell you about. But we pitched there, and it was also great. Yes? You'll be there next week? Yeah, amazing experience. So many. That's actually how I met my next acquirer, and I'll get to that story in a second. But South by is a great place to network and just kind of be around people. There's this concept. Have you ever read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear? Okay. He talks about this, not so much in that book, but in some of his posts, about what it means to be lucky. And we were lucky, I'll put it this way, to be in that pitch competition at that time with that person from M&A, George Kane, who really saw a vision and was able to bring us into Pearson. I was super lucky. But there's this kind of luck, and he talks about this. It's hard to be lucky standing still. And so there's this luck of momentum, right? So if you're a physics person, you're bumping into stuff in the world. And if the more you're moving, the more you're going to bump into stuff, right? You go to South by Southwest, you're going to bump into things that you didn't even know existed, people you didn't even know were around that might want to help you. That's hard to do sitting in a chair, right? So you have to have that kind of luck. And I guarantee you, the more you start moving around, the luckier you're going to be. And you hear that often from people, but they never really define what they mean by that. Oh, I was super lucky. Yeah, I was lucky. I was lucky that I was there on that day, but I was also lucky that I just started moving forward, that I decided to go when I could have just stayed behind and said, yeah, you're right, we shouldn't go to this, right? So know your customers and listen to them. I listen to my customers very early. They help me build the product. So listen to your customers. If you're early stage, make sure you do that. Get the small stuff right. I'll tell you one big mistake I made. I gave half the company to my co-founder right out the gate. And that ended up being a problem for us down the line. So I won't get into the details of that because I know we're on camera. But it just ended up being a mess. So make sure that you get that small stuff right. Document all the agreements you have. Make sure you have everything in writing. Make sure you have contracts for your customers. Just make sure you have your house buttoned up. Because when it comes time for acquisition, they're going to ask for all that stuff, right? So you want to make sure that right now it doesn't seem important, like, oh, my books and my accounting and all, but that stuff matters when they start looking at your company, and you'll have to scramble to get it together if you don't have it together along the way. So my encouragement to you is make sure that your house is in order. And then just say yes. You never know how things are going to turn out. So I could have, that literally changed the trajectory of my life and career by saying yes to that kind of one moment in time. I did some more moving. You'll notice there's a common theme here. I lived in California, and then I moved to Utah briefly. I lived in a basement for about 8 months just to keep the company afloat and kind of reduce my expenses. And then I went from Texas post-acquisition. I had to move to San Antonio. That's where Pearson's main headquarters was. So I moved to San Antonio and then ended up in Virginia doing policy work. Yes? Stopped it. Yeah, I went full in. That's I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. That was also kind of a little bit of a disconnect between me and my co-founder. I was fully in the business, and he was working a full-time job, right? And so our just structure was different. Like, I depended on the company where he did not necessarily depend on the company. So we weren't equally kind of at risk for the outcomes that we were trying to achieve, right? Good question, though. So Pearson, I'm going to walk you through this quickly because I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but being acquired for Pearson was absolutely awesome. I do not regret it. People ask, oh, did you, giving up your baby and all of that type of stuff? And I was like, you make the deal that you make at the time with the information you have, and you just don't look back. And that was kind of my philosophy on this. I was like, hey, I can scale within the largest organization in the world. They had the largest student information system, and I said, hey, if I can have more impact through Pearson than I could on my own, then absolutely. And I was 1,000% behind that idea. So I learned some things at Pearson. I moved, for me, post-acquisition, I moved from being a product builder, I was heavily involved in building the product, to more of a product champion. So my job was to go around DC and to events, South by Southwest, other places, and talk about this idea of dropout prevention and why it was so important and why we needed to tackle this as a company. Now, it had a financial motive, right? I had a product that Pearson was selling that did that, but I was truly trying to solve this problem at a global, kind of national scale within the U.S. So I learned one thing about big companies. They can do a lot of great things, but one thing they do really well, if you want to leverage them, you and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday, they have the power to convene, right? They have money, so they can bring people together. And while I was in DC, I went literally to every organization that was working on Dropout, and there was about 30. And if you go back to connecting the dot, like the beginning of this story, I literally went door to door to all 30 organizations. I walked in sometimes, but I was with Pearson, so they would open the door for me and usually have a meeting. So what I learned is they were all working on this problem, but none of them were talking to each other. And I said, what an opportunity. How can I bring these people together? Pearson had the money. We were in DC, and so we brought everybody together for the first time, I think, in the history of all of those 30 organizations, and produced a document on how do we change the tide of dropout in our country. And what was produced, if this little pointer will work, maybe, the Pearson Foundation, we produced a report called Building a Grad Nation. This report ended up on the president's desk and eventually turned into policy that changed kind of the course of dropout in America. It was called the Civic Marshall Plan. And there was an amazing group of people. The Powells got involved, America's Promise. There's a bunch of great groups, and it was awesome just to be a part of that, right? And I felt like that was kind of the capstone on that story for me. It's like, hey, I have, not that it was like a mission accomplished moment, but it was one of those moments where like, hey, I had set out to do something, and I had been able to do that on multiple levels, pull multiple levers to try to solve this policy, product, kind of all the above. And it was a super great experience. The reason why I ended up leaving Pearson was because you have to stay in your own lane. And as an entrepreneur, that is really hard to do, right? You are used to being your own captain, and you get to go anywhere you want. And when you're in a big organization like that, you do have to, there's other products, there's other people, all that stuff. It's important, but it just wasn't for me after a period of time. So I'm just going to pause here real quick. Just one, if there are any questions. A lot of times I know that people don't talk about their personal life in this. I'll just say personal life was happening. I'd gotten married. Kids, all that stuff was happening while I'm building this company, and that also plays into your stress levels and what's happening. Like you're dating somebody. Are they cool with kind of your lifestyle? Dating an entrepreneur is not easy. I'll tell you that. So just know that you got to deal with all that as you're going through this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but just it was tough trying to manage all of that. Being a dad, being a good husband, being an entrepreneur, all that stuff. So that's all happening, coinciding with all the stuff that you're seeing here. And they have to deal with you as those ups and downs of life, right? So make sure you pay attention to the small stuff there too. Pay attention to the important people of your life. Don't ignore it all just for the sake of the company. So I'll just leave it at that. Also going to pause just quickly. Any questions? Any details that I didn't get into that you just kind of want to know? Yes? Yes. I did. So usually I'd be somewhere like this and telling them about how I want to solve dropout prevention, and they would approach me and say, hey, I really like what you're doing, and then we just start a conversation. And I will say that mentors, asking people for advice is the easiest way for them to kind of eventually build a relationship with you. Be genuine in asking for the advice, but that advice eventually leads to a mentor. That mentor usually leads to sometimes a funder. So I find asking advice from people is the best way in the door. Genuinely ask for it, but it usually leads to other things. Yes?
What kind of traction did you have at that pitch competition?
In New York. Great question. We were super early, so we had about 30 or so districts on board. I only traveled within the Southern California area. Basically, if I could drive there, that's where I went, right? So we were kind of confined to a geographic region. So again, very early, super lucky that Pearson was willing to take a chance on this. All right. So I left Pearson and I got the bug. This time I was trying to solve a different problem. This was another pitch competition. Actually, this wasn't a pitch competition. This was, I just happened to be there that morning. I was at a co-working space called 1776 out of DC. If you haven't been there, it's awesome. And David Cameron, who was the Prime Minister of the UK, happened to be in town. And I happened to be at my desk. And he happened to come by and have a conversation. Those are the two founders of 1776, which I don't know if you see the irony in us wearing 1776 in front of the UK Prime Minister. But it was this cool moment because I had something in common with him that I didn't realize, which was Pearson is based in the UK. They're a London-based company. So we started talking about that. He's also a dad, and the product I was starting then was for parents. And I found this whole parent thing interesting kind of leveling ground for a lot of people because although he's the Prime Minister, when he gets home at night, he's dad, right? And so I could talk to him about the struggles of being a dad and wanting to be involved and kind of what we were trying to solve then. But I happened to just say yes. This picture happened to be on the cover of the Washington Post later that week. And again, just to the power of, he wasn't there to see me, right? I'll just put it that way. But I happened to be there at the right moment, at the right time, and the picture got taken, and it got on the Post, and that helped me personally. That helped me kind of gain some credentials. So the big scary problem that I was trying to solve after I left Pearson was, or at least I thought I was trying to solve, was that in the U.S. K-12 schools, there are about 50 million parents that want to support their children, and there was really no online way to give. Imagine, I'm sure you remember the candy bar sales and the cookie dough and the gift wrap paper that nobody eats or buys or uses. And that is that in 2014 when I started this, that still was the case. Most of the fundraising was done that way. And I was an entrepreneur dad trying to raise 2 kids, and it was really hard. And there were times I wanted to participate in my kids' life, but it was very difficult for me to do because there was no way for me to give online. And I said, how is that possible in 2014? Fast forward 22 years, still kind of like that. But at that time, I was like, that's impossible. Like, why can't they fix this problem? At the same time, again, those moments of inspiration, there was this watch that launched. I don't know if you remember the Pebble watch. You remember. Okay, so it was the very first smartwatch that was built. This guy in California put up a Kickstarter campaign. He had a great graphic. This was the graphic. And I'm watching him like raise this money, and it was like one of the largest Kickstarter campaigns in history at the time. He hadn't even built the product, and he raised pre-order $10 million in sales. I mean, it was like insane. And then I was looking at my life, and I'm doing this fundraiser for my daughter, and I'm asking people for checks and quarters. They're literally giving me like, quarters in my hand for this fundraiser. And I'm like, what in the world? Like, I was very envious of this guy. I was like, why can't we take that concept and apply it to schools? And so that's exactly what we did. Time check. All right. We ended up building, and I'll go back to this quickly. I thought we were trying to solve that problem because that was my problem as a parent, right? I was like, hey, I want an easy way to give. And as I started talking to my customers, we started working with PTAs and PTOs, and I was like, that was an interesting market, and I was learning a lot, and there was really no sales or distribution strategy through them at the time. It's like they're all independent, they can all make their own decisions. There's a lot of them, but we were having a tough time. And I was in a customer's office, and I was talking to her, and I said, hey, it was in Arlington, Virginia, and she says, hey, the problem I'm really having is that I have to manage all this fundraising. It's like the PTA does it, and the teachers do it, and there's all this fundraising out there, and I'm responsible for it at the district level. And then it was like a light bulb. I was like, okay, the only way for me to solve this other problem that I had originally set out to solve was to solve the district's problem. And this is a kind of classic K-12 problem or education or government agency problem, like your buyer's problem and the user's problem can be different sometimes. So we thought we were solving that problem, and we pivoted the company to solve the district's problem because there was more money. There's a clear distribution and sales plan related to that. I could sell to schools, I could sell to districts. And so we took our original idea and pivoted it. And what they needed is like these approval process, basically like an Oracle kind of built system that has fundraising capabilities, but has all the kind of accounting and back end to support it. So we went out to solve that problem. We built the solution to the big scary problem for them was a fundraising management platform for schools and districts that accounts for every dollar raised. And so we took that out into the market. We grew. I happened to be at South by Southwest, and we were raising our seed round of money. So we were trying to raise $1 million round, and I was trying to close off that round. And it was the night before I was going to leave South by Southwest, and I was a member of Capital Factory, which is another incubator. I was a member of two at the same time because we had a lot of Texas-based customers, so I said, yes, let's do that. And Josh Baer, who was the founder of that, said, hey, there's this guy I think you should meet, but he can only meet with you tomorrow in the morning for coffee for 15 minutes. And I was like, yeah, but I was thinking in my head, my flight, I got to get there. I don't like being late. I hate being late to the airport. But I was like, just do it. So I said yes. I went to that coffee meeting at the Starbucks in Westlake, if you've been to Austin, and I met a guy named Dean Draco. Dean was the founder of Barracuda Networks, so huge spam filtering company. I really didn't know much about him when I met him. That's probably why I was a little, I don't want to say cocky, but I was like, hey, I'm raising this round. This is what we're doing. Are you in, you're out. We were only there I was only there 15, 20 minutes. And so Dean was polite and, said, hey, I'd like to learn more. He eventually did not participate in the round, and we ended up closing out that round without him. 6 months later, after we had closed out that round, I get a phone call from Dean. Hadn't talked to him in 6 months. And he's like, hey, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Dean Draco. I'm in California at the time, about to head into a partner meeting. And he's like, hey, I think I've got this other company called Livingtree. And I'd like to combine what you're doing with what they're doing because I think this could be kind of like the Amazon for parents. I just have this vision of how we combine these two things. He said, are you willing to meet with me? And true fashion, I told you, I just say yes, even though that meant flying from California to Austin to do that. I did that. I flew to Austin. I met with Dean, and we were acquired by Livingtree 2 months later after that meeting. So again, kind of connecting the dots in my own timeline. I didn't know how that coffee was going to turn out. That could have been like I could have never talked to Dean again, and I would have known the difference. But I happened to meet the guy that was going to acquire me without even knowing it that morning of South by Southwest. So don't discount the power of saying yes. So this time we had 8. So just kind of structure. We had 3 co-founders. We were a Virginia LLC that converted to a Delaware C Corp. So in order to raise our seed round through Angel, we had an Angel List, a syndicate round. We had to become a Delaware C Corp. I had 8 advisory board members. Every single one of them I met at a pitch competition. I was a collector of advisory board members. But some of those folks were Michael Chasen, who was the founder of Blackboard, was on my advisory board. Ben Wallerstein, who runs a company called Whiteboard Advisors. Craig Cummings, who runs a venture VC firm called Moonshots Capital. And I tell you, these people all have, when you have an advisory board that really works for you, it can grow your company. And I just had a collection of amazing, amazing people. I think you had asked earlier, did I give them equity? Yes. And it was such a pleasure when we got acquired to give them that check to say thank you for all the work that you did because they did it for equity only. And so that was just an amazing, amazing opportunity to be able to do that. So we were acquired in 4 years. There was something else I was going to say about this. So that's what I'm kind of doing today. Fast forward, I became the CEO of Livingtree during that course of that. So it's kind of an interesting acquisition that doesn't normally happen. Dean had a vision. He wanted me to lead that vision for the company. So that was part of the deal. And to this day, we're continuing to work on that vision to how do we solve this problem. So I won't say what's next for Livingtree because who knows, right? Who knows what meeting I'm going to go to and what that turns into. But I will say I absolutely love doing what I'm doing right now and still solving and tackling that problem. This is South by Southwest. We did 3 or 4 panels. These are all customers. And the reason I love this is I got my customer, Michelle Wallace was the chief, she's head of their foundation for Austin ISD. And Lena Berry was the chief financial officer for Chandler Unified, and I had them both come out and join me in a South by Southwest session. So it was super fun to kind of bring them up and do this kind of stuff. So connecting the dots, finding a startup hub. I was talking to a student yesterday, and he was like, "Hey, when I graduate, I'm worried about what's next for me." And I said, "Hey, you got to find your tribe. Everywhere I've gone, every city I've gone into, where are my people? I find where the entrepreneurs live. Places like this center. You've got a number of startup hubs. But if you end up leaving Tampa, find a startup hub somewhere. Get connected to them because there's density there. And what I mean by that is some of these investors and some of like the prime minister, he's not going to come see you. But if there's 50 of you in a center, they're more likely to come, right? Because there's more opportunities for them. So find a startup hub. Find your tribe, man. Find great mentors, maybe because I watched The Mandalorian last night, and this is why this was on my mind, but find a Yoda or a Grogu in your life that can help you. On the next slide, I'll show you quickly my Yoda, Craig Cummings, hands down. I have a question. That guy will answer it, pick up the phone any time of day. He was my investor first, but we became amazing friends over the course of time. So find mentors. Be a collector of great people in your life. Be careful who you take money from. If you're going to raise money, is anyone planning on raising capital? Okay. Be careful. The easiest check I ever took was the hardest money. It ended up being a disaster. I didn't really know the guy, and it ended up just being a disaster. So just word of caution, be careful. It was a small check from someone I didn't know, but we're trying to close out a round, and I was just adding people, and it ended up being just a total nightmare. So be careful. It sounds good, but if it's too easy, ask some more questions before you take the money. I know it's hard, especially when you're raising. Know your sales, distribution, and pricing strategy. I can't say this enough. You got to know how to sell. Bottom line, you can have the best idea in the world, but if you can't sell it and you can't get it out there, it doesn't matter, right? So spend some time on that. Get to know people that are really good at those things, and as you can probably imagine, just say yes. Last thing, for those of you that are raising capital, so that's Craig, my Yoda, and anytime Craig wants to meet, he likes to work out. So we go work out and we meet while we work out. Like I said, I just say yes. He says, I'm here and I'll go. And I said, Craig, what happens? So he runs Moonshots Capital. I said, what happens when the door closes and the entrepreneur is like done and you and your business partner are talking about the company? Like, what goes through your head? What are the things that you start looking for as you're kind of evaluating that company? And he said 3 things to me. And I share this with you because I think it's super important to remember these 3 things as you're pitching anybody. I mean, this goes for any pitch, but particularly investors. You got to be likable. I don't know why he started with that, but he did. And I was kind of surprised, actually, that he started with that. He's like, you got to be likable. And so I dug into that a little bit, and what he meant by that is you need to be authentic. You need to tell a story that's your story. VCs, they see a lot of people, and so they can smell stuff that other people can't, right? So be authentic. And then the second one is, it seems so silly, right, that would be up there. My sister is a CEO of a company called Common Desk, and when she hires people, she looks for one thing, and one thing only to start the conversation. If that person does not smile in the interview, they're automatically disqualified. She will not hire them. She calls it the smile factor. So have a smile on your face. You are in there to talk about something you're passionate and you love, and that should come through when you're talking to these investors, to anybody really, right? You're pursuing your masterpiece in life, right? So be likable, authentic, smile. Don't forget the smile. Competent was the second thing. Do your skills match the problem? Do you have a background in whatever it is you're trying to solve? Or do you have a team? If you don't personally, do you have a team that has the background that can solve this problem? So they want to know about the team. Again, these are both kind of people things that they're looking for. Have you assembled the right team as the leader if you don't have that particular skill? And then execution. Can you execute? So you can have a great plan, they like you, you've got a great team, but they have to believe that you can execute, and that goes back to your sales and distribution strategy, right? They got to believe, even if you're pre-revenue, that the plan that you put together, you can actually pull it off. And what helps with that is if you've had success at that before, right? I can tell you, a second company and a third company is much easier than the first company because you've got a track record, right? So you starting off, get a track record somewhere, in sales. You know how to pull this off because you've done it before, even if wasn't your own company. Then the last thing he said to me was, don't underestimate the first one. He kind of went back to, hey, being a person that they can trust, because when you take money from an investor, you're kind of like married to them for could be 10 years. So they got to like you. You got to like each other throughout that. But you can build, if you have the right ones, you can build amazing, amazing friendships. And I still visit Craig to this day. I still visit all my advisory board members. So anyway, I'm a collector of people and stories, and I continue to do that to this day. But I wanted to share that with you because I know some of you are going to raise money, and people always ask, like, what happens when they close the door? What are they talking about? And so I thought I'd give you a little insight on that. That took me from Virginia to Texas again. When I got acquired, I had to move to Austin because that's where the team was based. And then right before COVID hit, I moved to Florida because we had a baby and I needed to be close to my parents. And my parents have been in the Florida area for a long, long time. And I'm here today, so super excited. Thank you guys for having me. If you need any contact info, there's a QR code there. It's got my LinkedIn contact. It's got my email. I know a lot of you in here already have that stuff, but if you need it, Go build your masterpiece, and remember to just say yes. You never know where it will go. Thank you, guys.
What was your favorite place you lived? Why? It's not Tampa.
Well, I can't say Tampa is my favorite place I've lived. Through different stages of my life, I say California was great for that period of time. Austin was fun. It's a fun town. But I've lived in Texas twice and only for a year both times, so that probably tells you something. I have nothing wrong with Texas. Anybody watching this video, I like Texas. But Florida, to me, reminds me a lot of Austin probably 10 years ago. There just seems to be such an amazing opportunity here, so I could not be more excited to be in Tampa. I think there's just a lot happening, and I think there's a lot more coming. So excited to be here. But good question. Anyone else? Any brave souls? Yes?
Being in the ed tech space, was that challenging in like a lot of the conversations you were having about momentum and just like moving a company along?
Yes. Yes. Ed tech is an incredibly challenging area to raise money, and particularly back then. I could probably do a whole session on just raising money, like angel investors and pitching and not really understanding the levels. Like, you go to a meeting and there's people in the room that apparently can write you a check for what you're looking for. But then, how those angel systems work, they're all different. Sometimes you pitch 3 times to then have to pitch the individual investor. So, not understanding that, I'm like, oh, I made it to the next round. Oh, I'm at the next round after this, and then the third round, and I'm like, okay, at some point, where's the money? Where's the check? And they're like, oh, no. After all of that, now I have a group of people that want to talk to you, and then I have to pitch those people individually. So it was incredibly challenging. And I say then, there's some big ed tech funds now that are dedicated to that space, but there wasn't a lot then, or at least I was a teacher, right? So I didn't probably know about them the way that I do now. So absolutely, it was challenging. But I will say that good ideas always win out. So even if you're in the ed tech space, no matter what your geography, I think if you have a good idea, you can definitely raise money. All right, we finished. We started on time. We finished on. Yes. Yeah. How big? Yes. Yep. Yes. Yeah, I will say this, as a founder, you feel that money problem more than everybody else in the company. It weighs on you constantly. So just be real with you. It does, right? Because you hire them, then you're responsible. You just feel a weight as a founder. But that said, you want to hire the right people. So that was always number one: is this the right person for the job? We tried to work out some combination of cash and an equity pool so that they could have some vesting within the company. I say one of the big mistakes that I made early on. There were times where I knew certain people were not the person I needed to have on the team, and I was slow to get rid of them. And every time I did that, I regretted it. I wish I would have done it sooner because I allowed it to kind of linger. So I have learned now to be quicker about those things. If I'm sensing that that's not working out and whatever, I have a nice conversation with them. I'm not rude or angry or any of those things. It's just not a good fit. And I talk about that, and I help them find something. If they want to go do something else, I'm going to help them go do that, even if they're not a good fit for my company. But I definitely was slow to do that early on. The way that I would think about it in terms of hiring is, can what you hire get you to the goal if you're raising more capital to get you to that growth goal, right? You've got to have the right people, and can they get you to where you need to go in terms of growth and kind of scaling. And that gets more and more challenging as you grow. Now, I've never run a huge company, right? My companies have all been relatively small and then acquired into a larger entity. So Joy probably could talk more about that. But great question. Yeah. It's still painful. Yeah.
I mean, I think the reality is there is an obligation that you feel as a founder with the people that you bring on board. I agree with the fire cooker. Um, every time that we didn't do that, it ended up being far more painful for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Than it should have been. But it doesn't really matter if it's a big company or a small company. They're going to be nights that you don't sleep. And when I told you guys that there's really no one else you can talk to, usually only your co-founder, from a CEO's perspective, that happens to be the truth. And you always have to put on the brave face because you don't want everyone else to lose confidence or faith going forward. When times are really tough, and I have been brought in to do a complete turnaround in Austin, which was, I love Austin from that perspective.
Yep.
I imagine walking in and being brought in by the VCs to fix a company that had not turned a profit in 6 quarters, have had 6 consecutive down quarters. They've laid off a bunch of people. People had no idea whether they're going to have a job the next day. There was all this other stuff going on. And I opened it up as kind of a town hall, and I asked some questions, and a lot of people responded anonymously, literally write on a piece of paper and leave it at the door walking out without your name. But about 5 people in the room raise their hand and go, why on earth did you take this job?
Mm.
Why are you here? You don't have to be here. So imagine getting to explain like why you did that because you had a bigger lead and a vision for what this company could be, and you were willing to come in and do that. But you kind of knew all eyes were on you, but you had to put on a brave face and go, okay, we're going to go do this together and get those people who had been really treated poorly for quite a while and who know what's going on to then believe enough to follow. The first quarter I was there, when I came in and looked at it with IGCs, and I said, the numbers you have set are absolutely unrealistic. This is the right number. I got on a plane that Friday to come back to Tampa because I couldn't move to Austin for me. I had an apartment out there. Was coming home, and I was so disgusted because I just knew we were going to be able to make that number. And when I got on the plane to leave, really nice. Thanks. I really didn't think it was going to happen. I landed in Tampa, and my phone was going crazy. We got an order that came in after I got on the plane to come that took us over that number, and we made that number. And that was such a huge turnaround for people because now there was this belief that it actually is possible, and it completely changed the company. We ended up splitting the company into 2 entities. One of them still exists today. The other was acquired for 20 times what the VCs invested in it over time. But it's hard to do that. And so not every day is going to be fun. And it doesn't matter if it's a company with 25 employees or, a company with, 25,000 employees. I personally don't like the 25,000. I told you guys that. For me, we hit this number, and it's usually around somewhere between 300 and some odd, 300 to 500 employees, and you don't know everybody who works in your company anymore. And there is this space that exists in the company where people can be mediocre. I don't find that fun. I don't ever want to do that again. But you have aspirations. At one point, you think, I'm going to do this. I'm going to build a company this size. And you're like, that wasn't all that.
I agree. But treat your people well, no matter what.
Yes.
That's a huge thing that I learned, and regardless of the size, that goes a long way. Like, my philosophy is, hey, it didn't work out with us. Doesn't mean like you're a bad person. It just wasn't the right role. And it might have even been my fault. I hired you for the wrong role, right? Ultimately, it rolls up to me. So just treat your people kindly, regardless of the situation. Set clear expectations for them. Another learning of mine. I felt like everybody knew what was in my head, and I had to say it like over and over and over again, and more times than I wanted to, because it just wasn't always clear, right? And over time, you got people. I had relationships where, like, especially with engineers, I could say something and they totally got what I wanted to do, and we didn't have to do a lot of explaining, but it didn't start that way. So anyway, a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah, so hire good people that can get you to the growth that you need to get to within the time frame of the burn that you have. All right, one last time check. I think we're good. Thank you again. I'll see you guys around.